One of the largest and most bloodiest of the American Indian Wars ends with one of the most historic executions in American history, leaving neither the guilty nor the innocent unscathed. Now that should be a movie. Hello, and thank you for watching today's episode of That Should Be a Movie. I'm C.W. Johnson Jr. Today's book I'd like to pitch as a movie is 38 Nooses, Lincoln, Little Crow, In the Beginning, The Frontier's End, by Scott Berg from Pantheon Books. The Dakota War of 1862, also known as the Sioux Uprising, the Dakota Uprising, Little Crow's War, or the Minnesota Massacre, was one of the largest and bloodiest of the American Indian Wars, and the first with any of the Sioux tribes. As many as 800 settlers were killed, and attacks that would become tropes in the Western genre. The war would end with the U.S. military carrying out massacres of peaceful tribes, which would also become a trope in revisionist westerns of the post-Vietnam era. The war itself is a microcosm of the Indian Wars, as it proves how history cannot be painted in black and white. Why the Dakota rose up is perfectly understandable. The corrupt government agents were not providing them with the food and money promised by Washington. And in response to their plight, an agent, Andrew Merrick, said, in some versions, "Let them eat grass." However, the brutal atrocities, massacres, tortures, and mutilations that the Dakota carried out on women and children dispels the peaceful image many today have of the 19th century American Indian. Despite its importance, the Dakota War of 1862 has become a footnote in American history because it took place while the American Civil War was occurring further east. A great deal of Berg's book is focused on the broader scope of U.S. history at the time, unfortunately making his narrative wander away from the main story. His book was the only one I could get my hands on at the library or bookstore. There are several other books on the subject. I was very surprised by the number of books I saw at museums in southern Minnesota during a trip there over the summer. The whole war could be a miniseries. The interworkings of Dakota society, in which many refused to take part in the violence, and the story of the Christian converts who helped save white settlers is fascinating. The attacks on and sieges of Fort Ridgely and the town of New Ulm have enough material to be epic films like the 1964 classic Zulu. However, I would like to focus on the aftermath of the war. What makes the Dakota War uniquely tragic is the hanging of 38 warriors and the part Abraham Lincoln played in the process. After many of the warriors surrendered with their white captives at Camp Release on September 26th, they were tried by military tribunals. The trials were speedy, only lasting about 5 minutes, and many of the warriors were considered guilty unless proven innocent. 303 were found guilty of rape and murder and sentenced to hang. The evidence against many of them was flimsy, such as the admission they had fired a gun in battle. Several missionaries, such as Henry Benjamin Whipple, contacted Lincoln, alerting him of this injustice. Lincoln was in a precarious spot. To him, the law was sacrosanct, and he considered it his moral duty to see it upheld. Yet, if he interfered, he might lose Minnesota in the next election, which he needed to win in order to hold the Union together. General John Pope, commander of the Department of the Northwest, wrote him saying that if all 303 were not hung at once, that the Dakota would take it as a sign of weakness and attack white settlers again. Also, if the warriors were not hung immediately, then the settlers might attack more Indians themselves in order to release their anger. On the ground, Colonel Stephen Miller faced mobs throwing rocks as he transported the prisoners. He had to protect them from men like Major Frederick Grant, who threatened to lead a lynching mob. Newspapers called for hangings in the vilest terms, and the mob said they would not impede the orderly process of justice unless the president should pardon or attempt to release the prisoners. Lincoln sent his chief of clerks, George C. Whiting, and Assistant Interior Secretary John Palmer Usher to Minnesota on a fact-finding mission. When they returned, they helped him review the cases. With their help, as well as that of a lawyer from the Department of the Interior, Francis Ruggles, Lincoln decided that all cases involving the rape and murder of children and women and the killing of unarmed men would qualify for execution. When the 3 men were done, and with the approval of Lincoln's presidential pen, 264 men were spared, while 39 men were condemned to death. One of the 39, Round Wind, would be pardoned the night before the execution. On December 26th, the remaining 38 men were led from the pen, where they were held separately from the rest of the warriors. They were led to the large scaffolding, which was one platform, where hoods were put on their heads. Except for the murmuring of the crowd and the singing of the prisoners, the air was silent. One warrior managed to moon the crowd. Then there were 3 drum beats, and the men fell to their deaths in unison. 20 minutes later, all were declared dead. They were buried in a mass grave at the side of the river. Doctors robbed the graves for medical research that night. One of them was William W. Mayo, father of the founders of the Mayo Clinic. The hanging remains the largest mass execution in American history. Within a year, the uprising's leader, Little Crow, would be dead, shot by a settler while walking through a field. The Minnesota government took measures to expel the rest of the Dakota from the state. Bands of Sioux living in present-day North Dakota who had not taken part in the uprising would soon have hostile encounters with the U.S. Army. Lincoln would call for reforms to the government's Indian policies. Reforms that would result in the Indian schools. It was the beginning of the end of the Western frontier. There are several interesting figures in the saga. Joseph Godfrey, a runaway slave who fought on the side of the Dakotas. He was acquitted after turning state's evidence. General Henry Hastings Sibley, who had spent time with the Dakota, fathering a child and leading negotiations at treaty meetings during the 1850s. He would fight the Dakota at the battles of Birch Coulee and Wood Lake. And of course, the leader of the uprising, Little Crow. He had met with government officials in Washington and had gnarled and bent wrist for withstanding assassination attempts from within his own tribe. He encouraged his people to take up farming, attended white schools, sent his children to mission schools, and would be just as likely to be photographed in traditional dress as well as white clothing. After some young men killed settlers while stealing food, Little Crow called for restraint, but when the war party called him a coward, he knew he must lead his people. Still, while on the warpath, he would spare women and children and order the warriors to do likewise, although some, like Cut Nose, would ignore him. One story that brings out the tragedy of the Dakota War of 1862 is that of Sarah Wakefield and Jakaska. Sarah was married to the doctor of the Upper Sioux Agency and was called by the Dakota Tonka Wanakanka Wasti, which meant large good woman. She and her husband had helped several wounded warriors after a skirmish with another Indian tribe a few years earlier. A couple of weeks before the uprising, she had taken an axe to break the door of a warehouse so the starving Dakota could get to the flour. After the uprising, a man named George Gleason was escorting her to safety when he was shot and killed by a Dakota named Hapa. After shooting Gleason 3 times, Hapa tried to kill Sarah, but Jakaska, an older man who knew the Wakefields from before the war, stopped him. Jakaska took Sarah back to his camp, where the women and children made her and her children change into Dakota dress and smeared their faces with dirt and mud There were rumors that the returning warriors would kill all the captives, and Chakaska and his band did all they could to protect them. At one point, Chakaska took Sarah to his tent, claiming her as his wife in his people's tradition, and declaring to the warriors that they would have to come through him to get to her. This caused scandalous rumors to circulate among the rest of the captives. Sarah managed to convince Chakaska to turn himself in at Camp Release. Despite Sarah promising Chakaska protection, he was still arrested by the soldiers. Sarah was very angry and frustrated with the soldiers as Chakaska felt betrayed. Sarah helped him write his defense against the charge of murdering George Weeson, declaring how he and his mother had protected her and her family and provided her and the children with food. Still, the military commission found him guilty. Sarah wrote to the officers in charge, pleading his case. Chakaska would become one of those spared by Lincoln. Yet when the condemned prisoners were separated from the rest, someone either accidentally mispronounced his name or purposely pointed at him, making him one of the 38. He did not seek a pardon. After he was hung, Sarah wrote to Lincoln expressing her sorrow and her anger. She also wrote an account of her captivity, setting the record straight on Chakaska. Her account is considered very liberal by 19th century standards. I believe that Chakaska and Sarah should be the human interest story in a film adaptation of the Dakota War of 1862. I could see Robert Redford, Ron Howard, Scott Cooper, Edward Zwick, David Mackenzie, or Taylor Sheridan behind the director's wheel. I thought I saw a screenplay for 38 Nooses on the blacklist, but have not been able to find the right year. If such a screenplay exists and is put into production, I think the last shot should be of Reconciliation Park in Mankato, Minnesota, where a memorial bears the names of the 38. Because it was one of the largest of the Indian uprisings and ended with the largest mass execution in American history, I believe that 38 Nooses by Scott Berg should be a movie that remembers the victims on both sides. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And let me know in the comment section what story from American history, particularly Western history and the Indian Wars, you think should be a movie.